Welcome. I am Michelle LeClaire, and Buckham Gallery is pleased to present Permeable. It's the first exhibition of 2020 and the first exhibition of Buckham's second year in the new gallery. Part of Buckham's mission is to present contemporary art of the highest quality and standards. And today we present an artist talk with Dominique, Chastenet, Géry, and Ardea, Thurston-Shaine, who will discuss their paintings. Dominique and Ardea call Ann Arbor home currently. However, they have collectively lived in landscapes on both coasts, east and west, and abroad. As you can see around you in the gallery, they exemplify contemporary painting of its highest quality and standard in their masterful, ambitious paintings. Before I turn it over to them, I would like to thank the Michigan Council for the Arts and Cultural Affairs, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Greater Flint Art Council Share Art Genesee Grant Program, made possible by Genesee County Arts Education and Cultural Enrichment Millage Funds, your tax dollars at work. Dominique is going to speak first, and then Ardea, and then we can open it up for questions.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to the Buckham Gallery for having us. This is a real honor, and we're really excited to be able to show together Ardea and I. This is our first collaboration. We hope that we'll be able to do this again because it's brought us both closer together, and we've had lots of very interesting, fruitful discussions. My work references my struggle to think about the concept of home and how it's anchored in the early childhood imprinted landscapes. I moved to this country with my parents in the 50s. When they decided they'd be here for only a few years, they traded the west coast of France for the west coast of California. And I became as aware of the importance of landscape to the way I felt as learning a second language was to the way I thought. It's never left me. Growing up the daughter of a photographer, which was the reason my father came to this country to practice photography, I was also very trained in the photographic view, how to see contrast, the colors, shading, composition. But it's painting that I've always really felt attached to, in part because painting was the connective tissue between the old world historicity and the new world, which I felt photography and its moment and ability to portray moments in time was better equipped to do. But I felt I could incorporate both things in painting, and I could make more decisions that evoked the kind of passage of time I wanted to portray. The above water scenes are far more restrictive and more narrative than the below water scenes, and that's on purpose. The below water scenes are things that that nobody knows what they should look like. So they're not representative of anything or any preconceived notion that people can ascribe to. Whereas the above water scenes are a little bit like my living in a place where I am accountable to my audience and to the company that I keep. And I find that's a very interesting concept between identities. So at various times I've called both Michigan and California home. Californians tend to orient themselves on an axis, so that's landmarks, and the ocean is a really important landmark, whereas Michiganders are on a grid system, so their cardinal directions are important to them, and the Great Lakes and the rivers are what really make them understand where they are in that landscape. So I have spent I used to be a portrait painter when I was younger, but the older I got, the more I understood that the identity that I was looking for was indeed rooted in this feeling about where am I at home, where is my future, and that's where I needed to understand my own roots. And being, as I said, in a sort of a mixed bag of places, I've really spent a lot of time thinking about what are the elements that trigger these feelings in me. My paintings are composites of a lot of photographs, but they are seamlessly conglomerated together in order to sort of make an emblematic scene of a time or a place, not an event, but so that you could recognize it almost emotionally, because it is all of the elements that you ascribe to that place and it's emblematic of that place. In this painting, Zug Winter, I was interested in the various states of water in sort of a symbolic way, and also kind of in how vapor and solid was very similar to sort of the environment and its pollution and the relationship that the environment has to the industrial river, the identity of Detroit. The Ambassador Bridge has to do with global commerce. All these things are sort of present, and the acid greens and blues are a big part of that message. Ardea and I have collaborated with this sort of by chance. We ran into each other, and we have been, both of us, very interested in how our environments shape us, how we fit into it. Ardea and I both grew up or had a lot of time on the West Coast, going through it, those similarities. Our generational differences has also added to the dialogue and given me a lot more to think about, and kept me from becoming stale. Collaborations, when you're an artist in your studio by yourself, is one of the best ways to get out of a rut and to expand your mind. And with that, I'm going to introduce Ardea Thurston-Shaine.
Thanks. So actually a body of water connected me to Dominique. I first met her because my husband Oliver and I are birders, and he was walking behind her house. There's a pond behind her house, and you can't really see it unless you go into her backyard to look over into it. And so he was trying to look into the pond, and she invited him to get a better view from her backyard. And that she ended up showing him her paintings, and he told me, you have to meet this person. I ended up meeting her, and in addition to having a great view of the pond, she also has an interest in philosophical thought as well as nature, and so we had a lot to talk about. I grew up both on the West Coast, as Ben said, both in Washington State, the Pacific Northwest, and Alaska. And so I spent a lot of time in the wilderness in Alaska, playing in the woods on the side of a mountain, far from everything, and playing make-believe games, a lot of imaginary things. So the imaginary and nature have always been combined in my thoughts and in my art. In addition to the imaginary, I also remember my dreams from a really long time ago, so I remember a lot of dreams. And I was also involved in Buddhist retreats, Buddhism via my mom. And so the imagination, fantasy, as well as dreams and Buddhist imagery have always appeared in my art and contributed to my penchant for abstract thought as well as concrete images. So as an undergrad, I did a watercolor painting of a figure that was set into a landscape, a dream landscape, so imaginary landscape, and that was a big step leading up to what I'm doing now, where I'm thinking about what's inside and what's outside of the human self and the human body, especially the concept of self. It started with the dream, the idea of a human embodied or like inside the dream landscape, because dreams take images that we think of as outside ourselves, and they kind of scramble them up, and when you're dreaming them, they feel like they're inside instead of outside. So that going from outside to inside really started off where I'm going now. Another pivotal painting was when I was applying to graduate school. I took a figure drawing that I had, and I broke up pieces of a mountainside landscape into the figure and then put a more imaginary landscape around the outside. And that was the start of the series where I thought about what's inside and what's outside, switching things up, going from realism to abstraction, and using the figural boundary, the boundary around the figure, to really separate the inside and outside spaces. And those inner landscapes were both comments on what the sort of the minds of the figures and their relationships to each other. So when I got to grad school, I started painting in oils, and I got really into the process of the oils and the material. And I also started a process where I, sort of similar to what Dominique does with combining many images into a painting. My paintings that I've done since then involve photoshopping many images together beforehand, and then using that as the basis where I start painting. There's one of the paintings on the other side of that wall with the bird in it, the pink one, called Ingrained, was part of the series, the first series that I did in grad school. And in that series, I took a figure, or a picture of an outdoor scene with a bird in it. So each one had an outdoor scene with a bird in it and an indoor scene with a self-portrait. And I layered one over the other. And the top layer has various parts that are transparent or more transparent than others, and that blends the two together. And that was, so those, instead of the inside of the figure versus the outside of the outline of the figure, that creates the two spaces of the photographs that combine where it's transparent. And that creates more of a complex relationship between the inside space and the outside space. I'm interested in the contradiction between my desire to be an individual person separate from everyone else in the whole world around me, and that importance that goes with that, versus my desire to connect and sort of lose that responsibility of being individual. And Dominique talked about how, as she got older, the figures disappeared from her artwork because she realized she was kind of, I guess, letting go of that need for the individuality, asserting the individuality. So I thought that was an interesting connection between our work. I'm still struggling with it. So the green painting is to your left as you come in the door, called Surface. That is really my direct response to that contradiction between desire for individuality and connecting to the environment. The figures sort of melt into the environment, but they're reaching out of it and also falling. And that brings me to related paintings where I was thinking about balance versus falling in relationship to that sense of control versus lack of control. And one of the other paintings is up here, the Lines of Flight, that's on the other side of this one. It has those balanced figures versus the off-balance figures. While I was in grad school, I also took classes in both modern philosophy, Western philosophy and Tibetan Buddhism. And the texts and ideas from those classes were the basis of my most recent works, which are these images of caves. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about the balance versus falling is the sculpture, if you haven't seen it, that's on the other side of this wall in ceramics is also those themes in that series. But the cave series, which is everything but that one in this space and a couple on the other side of the wall, it's called Folds and False Caves, and it is based on, mostly on a term, theory by the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze, where it posits that reality or the universe is one continuous surface, and every self that's part of that surface creates a fold in the fabric, so there's an inside and an outside. So these concave spaces, natural concave spaces, represent that inside, or metaphorical to the inside of the self. The other thing that they're referencing, besides that theory of the fold, is the there's a Tibetan Buddhist practice where a practitioner would go into a dark cave, and they would just stare into the darkness for a long, long time. And eventually, their mind would create these objects floating in the dark that seemed like they were outside the body, but since they weren't there until the person went in, that was supposed to help them realize that things that are outside and things that are inside all come from the same source, they're part of the same universe. So that was the cave reference. was another reference for these. And then these two paintings, Rebellion of Being Amidst Becoming, and One Among Many, which is the blue glacier one, are a continuation of that. They take surfaces with many folds rather than just the one inside surface. And then I added the figure back in, sort of questioning how we react to the idea of being part of that one surface, whether we're rebelling against it, like in this one, or sort of giving into it, like that one. And then finally, Door of Dreams, which is this one in between, is about the moment when you're just about to wake up from sleeping, and you can look both out into the waking world, which is those lighter spots, or deep into the dreaming world at the same time. And I find that interesting, especially to conclude with, because it takes that cave imagery that was in the earlier paintings right before it and returns to the idea of dreaming, which I think was there from the beginning. And we chose the title Permeable because it refers to a boundary that you can cross, like things cross over it and it can be broken, but it's still a boundary. Thank you for coming.
Put together things in Photoshop first, and that is such a controlled, and we can spend hours, days working on it. And I love the paintings, of course, but can you tell me what happens when you transfer to the canvas? And does it go completely, do you follow some other?
Yeah, so I have a basis, like I have the basis. One of my professors once told me that you need a home to, or something to come home to, and so I sort of use that. I like that way of putting it. I use the Photoshop reference as that. And sometimes I'm trying to make it look exactly the same as it, but not all the time. And I'm trying to, part of it is that freedom, like wanting to become freer, and it relates to the themes of the work. So like the painting Door of Dreams here, I was much freer with that, and I think it got a lot of motion because of that. So there's definitely things I do in the process, and I just love the process of oil painting too. But things like building up the textures, that's one thing that changes. And some things aren't worked out in the Photoshop, like the whole pink area around the outside of that was just pink. There was no texture, so that was came from my mind. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Dominique,
Yes.
when I looked at this Ambassador Bridge, a number of things went through my mind. It's like, to get that view of Detroit, you must have been, whoever took the photograph, I think you said,
It's all mine.
was in a boat, not over in Windsor, because,
No, everything's from Detroit because Detroiters don't see themselves from Windsor. They see the world out.
but this photograph is taken from the middle of the river.
I positioned it that way by cropping and moving things over, and I imagined some of it.
That's okay. Did you imagine everything below the surface, everything below, is that from a photograph of underneath water, or is that your imagination?
It's from photographs, but they are, from the scale of it would be very different. So I have a GoPro, and I turn it on, it's a blind video, and I drop it in places.
Got it.
And then I'll look at lots of video, and I'll take a few stills. So then I'll blow it up or reduce it or something. And originally, I had a lot of like old machinery and debris in there, and decided it would be too cluttered, and that the colors conveyed the toxicity was a lot more, I think, power and interest than if you beat a dead horse with a, you know, kind of keep bringing up debris. And I thought there was enough of that in there, and ultimately you have to be able to look at the image.
Thank you.
But yeah, a lot of mine are really, I don't know how to use Photoshop. So I end up doing a lot of sketches and printing a lot of them out. And mine are not as precisely rendered as the, I mean, of course, I need to have straight lines, I need to, but if you saw my source imagery, you might not understand how this came to be the painting.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment that may mean absolutely nothing, but this painting reminds me of, have you ever read Geoffrey Kennedy's Middlesex?
No, I know the book, or if I did read it, it was many, many years ago.
This could be the illustration of that book, and it's not because of anything, but it's because that whole book is about, not only about Detroit and, you know, relating to Detroit, but about layers in growing up. So anyhow, you might want to.
I'll look it up.
Yeah.
I'll definitely look into it. Thank you for that. Yes, sir.
I got a question for both of you. First, you said you immigrated from what country, and what did your dad try to do with its photography?
I'm touched that you're asking that question. So the question is, from what country I immigrated, and why did my father come to this country to be a photographer? After this, so we immigrated from La Rochelle, France, which is where Das Boat was filmed, the last stronghold. And he came from a family that was not tradesmen. And right after the Second World War, France was still very socially stratified. So you could not be a photographer if you came from a certain educated or upper class family. And he was very interested in photography. I think that had a lot to do with just the culture of after war, he would have been 19 or 20 when Bresson, for example, all those black and white paintings of Paris that we see everywhere. So I think that seduced him, and the technology seduced him. And so when he came to this country, it was just so that he could try out being a photographer. And we ended up staying, but they never bought permanent furniture. They never really thought that they would send us back to France for school. We did school by correspondence. It's just, and Ardea?
Yeah.
A question for you, in all the time you spent in Alaska, did you ever have a Buddha moment with a grizzly bear?
Not grizzly bears so much. I did when I think I was like 5 or something. I was very young. I did open the back door of our house and have like a black bear right there, like this far away from me. But it was facing the other way, so it was like the rear end of the bear, and I just closed the door. But yeah, lots of bears.
You had a lot of mountains around.
Yeah, it was way out in the wilderness.
You mentioned dreaming. When you dream,
Do you tend to be a participant, an observer in the dream, or that weird thing where you wake up not being sure which?
I would say both, all. Usually I'm a participant, but sometimes I'm not myself.
yeah,
Yeah.
that resonates. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I've used these things.
To say
but-
thank you to Dominique and Ardea and for all of you for